Good morning. Welcome, everyone. This is an open meeting of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board on April 12, 2016. We want to welcome all of you who have joined us today in person or listening to the webcast of this meeting. Today, the Board will take up a recommendation to propose new requirements that would apply to audits involving accounting firms and individual accountants outside the accounting firm that issues the audit report. Before we proceed with the agenda, I will note for the record that all board members are present. The first and only order of business before the board today in this meeting is a staff recommendation that the board issue for public comment a proposal to amend its auditing standards relating to the supervision of audits involving accounting firms and individual accountants outside the accounting firm that issues the audit opinion. And to present our staff's recommendation on this agenda item, I will turn to our Chief Auditor, Martin Baumann. Mr. Baumann.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and board members Harris, Ferguson, Hansen, and Frenzel. The Office of the Chief Auditor is pleased to recommend that the board propose amendments to its auditing standards relating to the supervision of audits involving other auditors and propose a new standard dividing responsibility for the audit with another accounting firm. Many companies today, including many of the largest corporations, have significant international operations. In audits of these companies, although the audit report is typically issued by a single firm or the lead auditor, portions of the audit may be performed by other accounting firms or individuals outside the lead auditor. In some cases, more than 20 accounting firms may participate in the audit. Collectively, these participants are referred to as other auditors. For example, if the lead auditor of a U.S. company that has operations in the United Kingdom uses its UK affiliate accounting firm to audit the UK operations of that company, the UK affiliate firm would be considered an other auditor for purposes of this proposal. The use of other auditors is especially prevalent among larger companies audited by larger accounting firms. PCAOB oversight data indicate that about 55% of audits performed by U.S. global network firms and about 30% of audits performed by non-U.S. global network firms were engagements using other auditors. Additionally, about 80% of the Fortune 500 issuer audits performed by U.S. global network firms involve other auditors. The work performed by other auditors on an audit can account for a significant share of the audit. In audits selected by the PCAOB for inspection that involve other auditors, the other auditors audit, on average, between 1/3 and 1/2 of the total assets and total revenues of the company being audited. Using other auditors can enable lead auditors to leverage the local workforce in countries where their audit clients operate and assemble a global engagement team. But just like at the lead auditor, the other auditors participating in the audit must have the necessary knowledge, skill, and ability to conduct an effective audit. The proposal addresses the assessment by the lead auditor of these qualifications of the other auditors. Also, working with other auditors can differ significantly from working with individuals in the same firm. For example, there may be differences among the other auditors, such as differences in business practices, languages, cultural norms, and quality control systems. These factors can pose challenges in the coordination and communication between the lead auditor and the other auditors, including possible misunderstandings regarding the work performed by the other auditors. Without adequate supervision by the lead auditor to address these challenges, deficiencies in other auditors' work can result in deficient audits. As a result, the lead auditor could issue its audit report without a proper evaluation of the work performed and evidence obtained in the audit, and in some cases, without a reasonable basis for its opinion. The proposal before the board today is intended to address these challenges. Now I'll turn the floor over to Dima Andrienko, who will discuss the reasons for the rulemaking, and then Lillian Sanoa, who will provide an overview of key aspects of the proposal. But before I do, I would like to acknowledge the many people within the PCAOB who provided significant contributions to this project. In addition to Dima and Lillian, I'd like to express my appreciation to Keith Wilson, Hunter Jones, Stephanie Hunter, Denise Machette-Ray, and Rob Ravis from the Office of the Chief Auditor, the team that led the project. I would also like to thank our colleagues from other divisions for their significant contributions, in particular, Andres Vanelli, John Powers, and June Suk-Lee in the Center for Economic Analysis, Santina Rocca and Elizabeth Ekternock in the Division of Registration and Inspections, and Matt Golden in the Office of General Counsel. Finally, I would like to thank the staff of the Securities and Exchange Commission for their support and timely assistance on the project. Dima?
Thank you, Marty. Mr. Chairman, board members, the proposal in front of you is designed to address challenges in coordinating the work of multiple firms and accountants in an audit engagement. Without adequate supervision of other auditors by the firm that issues the audit report, deficiencies in the other auditor's work may result in deficient audits. After risk related to multi-firm audits came to light several years ago, auditing standard setters, including the PCAOB, began improving their requirements for lead auditors. The PCAOB adopted risk-based standards for audit planning and supervision, but it also retained a separate auditing standard that applies to using the work of other accounting firms in some circumstances. When adopting the risk assessment standards, the board noted that it would likely address the use of other auditors under that approach at a later time. The current proposal is a careful consideration of the existing framework of requirements. It has been informed in large part by observations from PCAOB inspections and enforcement, but also by other sources, including the views of the members of the board's standing advisory and investor advisory groups, SEC enforcement activities, academic literature, activities of other standard setters, and the staff's own experience with multi-firm audits. Our analysis indicates the need to improve the existing standards for the lead auditor's supervision of other auditors. PCAOB inspections and enforcement continue to identify problems in audits that involve other auditors. Deficiencies exist in the work of both lead auditors and other auditors. Most audit methodologies of firms are based generally on the requirements of international standards and of PCAOB standards, including the PCAOB's older standard for using the work of other auditors. That standard allows the lead auditor to use the work of other accounting firms after performing specified but limited procedures. Recently, in response to deficiencies identified in PCAOB inspections, some firms have encouraged a greater level of supervision by the lead auditor. This includes, for example, more frequent communication with other auditors and a review of their work by the lead auditor. These efforts appear to have contributed to improvements in the quality of work performed by other auditors. The current proposal is intended to strengthen the existing requirements and impose a more uniform approach to the supervision of other auditors. The proposal would revise the existing standards to take into account recent changes that some firms have implemented to improve their auditing practice. The proposal would apply a risk-based approach to supervision in all audits in which the lead auditor assumes responsibility for the other auditor's work, whether or not the other auditors are from the same network as the lead auditor. The proposal would provide additional direction to the lead auditor on how to apply the principles-based supervisory requirements of PCAOB standards. I'm now going to turn this over to Lillian, who will provide an overview of the proposed amendments and the staff's recommendation.
Thank you, Dima. The proposal before the board today would strengthen the requirements for lead auditors and provide a more uniform approach to supervision in audits that involve other auditors. The proposal would amend certain existing requirements and propose a new standard for dividing responsibility. Highlights of key aspects of the proposed requirements are as follows. First, under current standards, the risk-based supervision approach described in existing standards does not apply to situations in which the lead auditor uses the work and reports of the other auditor under the existing standard called AS 1205, or as we call it today, AU Section 543. The proposal would supersede this standard and extend the application of the board's supervision standard to all audits involving other auditors. Under the proposal, the extent of the lead auditor's supervision of the work of other auditors is based on, among other things, the risks of material misstatements and the knowledge, skill, and ability of the other auditor. More specifically, the proposal would amend the board's supervision standard to provide specific direction to the lead auditor on how to apply the principle-based provisions of that standard to the supervision of other auditors. For example, the proposal would require the lead auditor to inform the other auditor in writing of the scope of work, tolerable misstatement, and identified risks of material misstatement, to obtain and review the other auditor's description of the nature, timing, and extent of audit procedures to be performed, including communicating any changes to the procedures that are necessary, to direct the other auditor to provide for review specified documentation, to obtain from the other auditor a written report describing the procedures, findings, and conclusions, and if applicable, opinion, to determine whether the other auditor complied with the lead auditor's written communications and whether additional audit evidence is necessary to be obtained. Second, the proposal includes a number of amendments to the auditing standard on audit planning. These would amend existing requirements to specify that they be performed by the lead auditor. For example, the proposal would incorporate and revise existing requirements for determining the sufficiency of the lead auditor's participation to serve as lead auditor on all audits involving other auditors. The change is designed to increase the likelihood that the firm issuing the auditor's report performs procedures on a meaningful portion of the company's financial statements. In another example, the standard would require the lead auditor during the planning stages of the audit to gain an understanding of the knowledge, skill, and ability of the other auditors who assist the lead auditor with planning or supervising the audit, including their experience in the industry in which the company operates, their knowledge of the relevant financial reporting framework, their knowledge of PCAOB standards and rules, and SEC rules and regulations. Lastly, the proposal includes a new standard numbered as AS 1206 and entitled Dividing Responsibility for the Audit with Another Accounting Firm to govern the relatively infrequent circumstances in which the lead auditor divides responsibility for the audit with another accounting firm. Currently, AS 1205, which the proposal would supersede, governs these circumstances. The proposed new standard would maintain the requirement that the lead auditor disclose in its report which portion of the financial statements was audited by the referred to auditor. The proposed new standard is designed to carry forward and improve existing requirements that apply in these circumstances. In closing, the staff is recommending that the board propose amendments to PCAOB auditing standards related to the supervision of audits involving accounting firms and individual accountants outside the accounting firm that issues the audit report, propose a new auditing standard dividing responsibility for the audit with another accounting firm, and propose related amendments to PCAOB auditing standards. We would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Baumann, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Andrienko, Ms. Sainova, for that presentation. I also want to acknowledge all the staff who worked on this project, in particular Hunter Jones, Stephanie Hunter, Denise Mushet-Ray, Robert Ravis in the Chief Auditor's Office, Matt Gordon from the General Counsel's Office, as well as Andres Vanelli, John Powers, and Jun-Suk Jun Lee in the Center for Economic Analysis. I'm grateful also, as the Chief Auditor has said, to our colleagues at the SEC, Chief Accountant Jim Schnurr, Deputy Chief Accountant Brian Croto, for their assistance with this project. The Board meets today to consider a proposal to amend the auditing standards governing an audit firm's use of other firms. This comes up regularly in multinational audits by firms of all sizes. Last December, the Board adopted a rule that will provide public transparency on the significant extent to which such audits involve the work of other auditors beyond just the lead auditor, who signs the audit opinion. Under that rule, registered firms will disclose information that allow investors to see, for any particular audit, how much of that work was performed by other auditors. The proposal before us today comes at the matter of other auditors from a different perspective, not one ensuring transparency, but one of assuring appropriate involvement in that work by the lead auditor. PCAOB registered firms around the globe contribute audit work to each other's audits, and our existing auditing standards prescribe responsibilities for the lead auditor with respect to the work of other auditors. Investors depend on the lead auditor to provide assurance there are no material misstatements in audited financial statements or material weaknesses in internal control, no matter where those misstatements or weaknesses may reside. In our inspections, we reviewed audits in which the inspected firm served as the lead auditor and used other auditors. We often also review the inspected firm's work in audits in which it was not the lead auditor, but played a role. That role can range from a full scope audit of a significant subsidiary to certain selected procedures that lead auditor specifies relating to a less significant component. Our inspections have found that many engagement partners do a good job of overseeing and coordinating the work of the affiliate and other audit firms that participate in the audit. But our inspections also encounter engagements that are not well managed, as well as work performed by the other auditor that does not meet the objectives of that auditor's role in the audit. Today's proposal is intended to require conduct by lead auditors that should result in a consistent level of quality assurance regarding other auditors' participation in the audit. The proposal would direct the lead auditor's supervisory responsibilities to the areas of greatest risk, consistent with our risk assessment standards. It would also require procedures that would cause the lead auditor to be more involved in the work of the other auditors through more communication, access to the other auditor's work papers, as well as more robust evaluation of the other auditor's qualifications and work. I look forward to public comment on the proposal, including comment on the economic analysis that underlies the proposal. I want now to turn to my fellow board members for any statements they may wish to make. We'll withhold questions until all board members have had a chance to make a statement, and then we'll have time for questions and discussions. Board Member Harris.
Mr. Chairman, I support the proposal before us today regarding audits involving other auditors and view it as an important and significant step forward in addressing the audit quality concerns noted through our inspection and enforcement activities. And I want to commend you, Marty Baumann, and Dima and Lillian for your excellent summary of the proposal, and also join the chairman in thanking the entire staff who have worked on this proposal over an extended period of time. And I would ask that my full statement be made a part of the record. Most investors in today's capital markets own shares in companies with foreign operations, as has been noted. In the release, approximately 40% of total assets and revenues of publicly listed companies are outside of the country of the signing auditor. The increasing globalization by public companies has led to the expanded use of other auditors in the audits of those companies. Based on PCAOB staff analysis of inspections data as of March 31st, 2013, about 80% of Fortune 500 issuer audits performed by the top 6 U.S. firms involved other auditors. In addition, other auditors are now playing a more significant role in such audits. As others have noted, the signing auditor may enlist assistance from another auditor to, among other things, manage costs or use personnel who are familiar with local practices and culture. Engaging other auditors may also enable a firm to accept engagements that it may have had to otherwise decline due to jurisdictional hindrances. Audits that involve other auditors, though, face certain challenges. Differences between auditors' business practices, languages, cultural norms, market conditions, and professional training, just to name a few, may adversely affect the quality of the audit. It is important that the signing auditor ensures that the work done by the other auditors is of high caliber. Our inspections have noted a generally higher rate of deficiencies for foreign-affiliated firms than for U.S.-affiliated firms between 2011 and 2013. This indicates that there are real differences in the quality of work performed by firms in the U.S. and their affiliates abroad. The nature of the differences and deficiencies that our inspectors have observed cover a wide range, from the other auditor not performing procedures requested by the lead auditor or required under our standards, to failing to communicate significant accounting and auditing issues to the lead auditor. Inspectors have also noted issues with the lead auditor's work that it relates to the other auditor. These include the lead auditor failing to, 1, assess the qualifications of other auditors participating in the audit, 2, review the results of the other auditor's procedures relating to fraud risk, and 3, provide specific instructions to the other auditors. Today's proposal, which calls for increased lead auditor involvement in and evaluation of the work of other auditors, is a positive step in addressing these deficiencies and increasing investor protection. This is especially important as inadequate lead auditor supervision has led to deficient audits. It's also consistent with what our investor advisory group recommended in 2011. The amendments proposed appropriately direct the lead auditor's attention to the greatest areas of greatest risk and include specific lead auditor supervisory responsibilities. For example, the proposal includes a requirement for the lead auditor to provide the other auditor with specific information in writing, have discussions about potential risks and material misstatements with the other auditor, and obtain and review the other auditor's description of audit procedures it plans to perform. Signing firm will also need to maintain a list of work papers of the other auditor that were reviewed but not retained. Today's proposal requires the lead auditor to be better informed about the qualifications and performance of the other auditor as well. For example, we are proposing that the lead auditor assess the other auditor's qualifications in compliance with pertinent independence, ethics, and registration requirements. The proposal also includes a separate standard for those situations in which 2 or more firms divide responsibility for an audit. We are not alone in taking action in this area. The International Auditing and Assurance Standard Board is currently assessing the need for change following persistent deficiencies in group audits reported by the International Forum of Independent Audit Regulators. Certain aspects of this proposal are also consistent with what a number of the largest firms already require under their methodologies. As noted in the release, some firms now require the lead auditor to have frequent, comprehensive communications with other auditors and review the other auditor's work papers in areas of significant risk. The board recognizes that imposing new requirements may result in some additional costs. Such costs, however, will not be significant for those firms that already required heightened supervision by the lead auditor and are justified for those that have not adopted such methodologies for the protection of investors. In my opinion, alternatives to rulemaking such as issuing interpretive guidance would not address the audit quality issues noted. I believe improving the relevant performance requirements in this area is consistent with the board's investor protection mission by promoting high-quality audits. There are indications that firms with enhanced supervision methodologies have already experienced a reduction in audit deficiencies. For these reasons, I support the amendments being proposed today. Finally, Mr. Chairman, today's proposal deals with the supervision of other auditors. However, I believe that appropriate supervision of firm personnel at all levels within a firm is an essential ingredient for an audit practice to perform high-quality audits. Such a supervision requirement regarding all such firm personnel was contemplated by Section 105C6, the failure to supervise section of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. The board previously issued a concept release in this area in August 2010, noting, quote, "The quality of a firm's audit practice is directly affected by the quality of supervision within the firm," close quote. And I would hope that we might revisit and move ahead soon on that proposal as well. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Board Member Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also support this proposed standard because I believe that it's important that there be clarity about the role of the lead auditor in engagements where a number of other auditors are involved. It's important that the lead auditor's engagement partner and engagement team in PCAOB audits understand what's required of them by our standards in performing the important role of assigning work on an audit to another auditor and then reviewing and relying on that work in forming the auditor's opinion. This proposed standard will strengthen those requirements by more clearly defining the lead auditor's responsibilities when using the work of other auditors, including by defining engagement team to include all other auditors participating in the audit. As mentioned by both of my board colleagues, a growing number of audits, particularly audits of global enterprises, are being conducted by more than one firm, legally distinct from one another, even if affiliated in a common global network. The use of such auditors in an audit that is often located, use of such other auditors that is often located in a different country can provide a number of benefits, including competitive and economic, or efficiency and economic benefits, by allowing lead auditors to use locally licensed auditors who may have language, facilities, and cultural knowledge that the lead auditor himself does not have. However, the use of other auditors in a multinational environment also introduces a number of challenges that can lead to inadequate audit performance. As discussed in this proposal, the PCAOB has found in its inspections significant issues in the conduct of multinational audits, including in the work performed by other auditors. We're not alone in the United States in these findings. For example, the International Forum of Independent Audit Regulators annual survey of inspection findings, which includes findings from more than 30 audit regulators around the world, has identified for a number of years supervision of group audits as a frequent area of inspection findings in the audits of public interest entities. Partly as a result of the persistence of those findings, the Global Audit Quality Working Group of IFER is undertaking an effort working with the 6 largest global network firms to look more closely at group audits with the goal of deepening our understanding about the root causes leading to these issues. I will also focus on how the firms are remediating these issues and assuring audit qualities across their networks, because one of the great concerns that we have had both at the PCAOB and in IFER is how the firms are able, with being legally separate entities, to drive audit quality across the networks. In any case, we believe that these undertakings, both by the PCAOB and by IFER, may begin to make a dent in the kinds of findings that we've been having persistently here. It's my understanding that some firms today have guidance and policies for the conduct of audits involving other auditors that exceed what is required by our standards, but that certainly is not true for all firms. It's important that the standards demand a level of performance in the supervision of other auditors that is uniform and that will assure a high and uniform level of audit quality, whether an audit is conducted by a single firm or by many firms. Therefore, I support this standard, and I believe that it will be beneficial both to elevate the performance expectations in the standards and also to enforce the audit firm's obligations to supervise other auditors in accordance with the standards. I want to express my thanks to, I'm not going to name all of you, because I know how many of you there are, but I want to thank all of the members of the Office of the Chief Auditor here, many of whom have been involved in working on this project over many years. Our Office of General Counsel here, the Center for Economic Analysis, whose work on this has been yeoman work and is, I think, added materially to the analysis that we've provided, and to our colleagues at the SEC. I'm looking forward to the comments on this, and particularly I hope that we will get some good comments on economic analysis that will help us sharpen our cost-benefit analysis.
Thank you, Liz. Board Member Hanson.
Good morning. We are here today to issue a proposal intended to enhance the planning and supervision of audit work conducted by the so-called other auditors participating in audits of the financial statements of U.S. public companies and brokers and dealers. In addition, we're proposing a new standard, though incorporating many of the current requirements for situations in which an auditor divides responsibility with another auditor or accounting firm. The other auditors addressed in the proposed requirements include other firms or individuals who participate in the audit but who are not part of the audit firm issuing the audit report. Under current standards, auditors may apply a variety of approaches to the oversight of other auditors involving varying degrees of oversight by the lead auditor over the work of the other auditor. While certain approaches taken by firms work well and result in high-quality audits, some of the approaches that are permissible under the current standards do not involve enough oversight by the lead auditor to ensure sufficient appropriate evidence is obtained to support the lead auditor's opinion in the audit report. As described in the release, many of the larger firms, particularly those that are part of international networks, have adopted methodologies that combine existing PCAOB standards and international standards on auditing. In some cases, firms have further supplemented these requirements by incorporating additional procedures, including procedures developed in response to inspection findings identified by the PCAOB or similar regulators in other parts of the world. These firms require frequent, comprehensive communication with the other auditors and review of other auditors' work papers in the areas of significant risk, steps which go beyond those currently required by PCAOB standards. Other firms, including those who don't follow international standards, continue to base their supervision of other auditors largely on existing PCAOB standards. As a result, the PCAOB has observed inconsistencies in practice among firms with regard to supervision of other auditors. The proposed amendments are intended to enhance supervision over other auditors generally and bring consistency to the approaches used by the firms. As the release discusses in more detail, our overall approach incorporates many of the concepts currently included in the International Standards of Auditing 600, Special Considerations, Audits of Group Financial Statements, but also raises the bar and incorporates additional or more specific requirements. For example, the ISA 600 requires the group engagement partner to evaluate whether the group engagement team will be involved in the work of the component auditors to the extent necessary. Our proposed amendments, on the other hand, more specifically require the lead auditor to determine its sufficiency of participation based on its relative responsibility in the areas of highest risk of material misstatement. In addition, our proposal includes more specific requirements than the ISAs regarding information that must be provided by the lead auditor to the other auditor and the documentation to be created and provided by the lead auditor. Those are just a couple of the differences. Overall, I believe the proposed amendments mirror what would be a common sense approach in any situation where one party decides to rely on another in connection with important tasks. Similar steps would apply in many situations outside of auditing, such as hiring a new employee. Important considerations include, do you have the right basis appropriate basis to rely on the individual or firm, the extent of reliance, communication to avoid misunderstanding, monitoring, supervising, and reviewing the work, and doing a final check. So the release poses a lot of questions, and I'm going to just highlight a couple that I think are really important and I wonder a lot myself about. The sufficiency determination. Is it clear how the lead auditor determines whether its own involvement in the audit is sufficient? Is this going to result in a significant change in practice compared to the current approach? Do firms currently take a different approach to the sufficiency if the other auditor is a firm in their own network? Should a different approach be permitted in that circumstance? The independence determination. The proposal states the lead auditor must take certain steps to determine whether the other auditor is independent. These include gaining an understanding of the other auditor's knowledge of and experience with SEC and PCAOB independence and ethics requirements, including obtaining a written representation that the other auditor is in compliance. Are these requirements clear? Are there obstacles? Are there unintended consequences? Supervision and review. Are the proposed amendments to AS 1201 requiring specific steps to supervise and review the work of other auditors sufficiently clear and reasonable? And scalability, are the requirements appropriately scalable?
I particularly encourage feedback not just from auditors, but from preparers, audit committees, investors, and others. I encourage audit committees and preparers in particular to discuss a proposal with their auditors and try to get a sense, is it going to make a big difference, or does the firm's approach today essentially incorporate all the things that we are proposing? And write us a letter with your observations. So finally, I want to thank the staff. Again, I won't name all of them, as Marty and the chairman have done a good job of that. The only person I will call out separately is our colleague Greg Skates, who led this project from the inception and recently moved to our Division of Registration and Inspections, and he worked tirelessly for many years in leading the project. I thank him as well.
Okay. Board Member Frenzel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support today's proposal to strengthen the auditing standards for the lead auditor's performance when other auditors participate in the audit. I'm not going to repeat all the details of the proposal that we've heard about already, and I'm not going to detail all the needs for the standards that we've heard about already. But I do want to say that I think this is a very important area for investor protection. These are large, complicated audits that span the globe, and our oversight activities have shown that we really do need better auditor performance in this area, and we've also heard that the current standards aren't necessarily driving consistent, good performance among auditors. So the need for stronger standards in this area has become evident over the past few years based on our inspection results and the actions of other standard setters. So I'm very pleased that we're putting out this standard today. And in my view, I believe the proposed requirements will help to enhance audit quality on these very large, complex audits involving other auditors. And I think that it's especially important that we do hear from firms and audit committees on others about the actual impact, because that was a challenging part of this proposal. In some cases, firms have already moved on beyond our standards, and in other cases, other standard setters have moved beyond our standards. And so right now there's differences in practice out there. And so as we've heard, for some firms, the impact may be greater than others, but the goal here is consistent audit quality on these very large, complex audits. So I support the proposal, and I look forward to hearing input and how we can get to the next step on this. I'm also very pleased that we're putting out a standard that's specifically directed at the auditor's performance of these large, complex audits, because, as I said, I do believe that this is important for investor protection. Strong auditing performance and procedural requirements, in my view, when appropriately designed and implemented, are a key element of audit quality, and that's really the goal here. High-quality audits on these high-quality auditing in these situations where investors could be put at risk. So I do believe the amendments and new standards should reduce the variability in audit performance, causing auditors to focus more consistently on the risks of material misstatements in the financial statements and appropriate responses, thereby benefiting investors. So again, I look forward to comments on this. I look forward to us moving to the next step and hopefully having an impact, a positive impact on auditing across the globe. I want to thank all the staff who've worked on this, from the Office of the Chief Auditor, the Center for Economic Analysis, and the Office of General Counsel. I know there's been a lot of hard work put into this proposal, and similar to Jay, I look forward to comments that might help us with the economic analysis. I thought that the economic analysis that is in the proposal has really helped enhance the quality of the proposal, but we still need some more information, and I'm hoping we can get that from commenters.
Jeanette, that leaves us time for some questions. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I guess my question is almost a follow-on to some of what I just said, and that is, what do you all envision the actual impact being on a large, complicated audit, so impact on an audit in particular, if in fact this proposal were to be adopted in much of the same form, and then across the board, how would this impact auditing of large, complex companies?
Okay.
Sure. We believe that the proposal will have an impact on a large number of audits. Although the impact will depend, the extent of the impact will depend on the extent of the current implementation of international standards, PCAOB standards, and in some instances, requirements that go beyond the existing standards. We cannot estimate the exact number of audits in each category, but we do believe that the proposal will impact many audits here, and therefore it will be important to understand carefully analyze the feedback that we receive on the proposal. The proposal addresses many of the same issues that have been raised by the IAASB, or to the IAASB in their evaluation of the post-implementation analysis of ISO 600. We analyzed that document, but also analyzed the invitation to comment document that was put out in last December, and the proposal does address the same issues, many of the same issues that are raised, including communication between the lead auditor and other auditors, the understanding of the qualifications of the other auditors, and also the extent of the lead auditor's involvement in the work of other auditors. So to the extent these issues, in fact, did arise in inspections by the PCAOB, and like Lou pointed to the inspections conducted by other members of the EFR, and they're picked up in the ITC, for example, when they reviewed ISO 600. Our proposal will address many of the same issues.
As Dima noted, and I agree this will, and it was in a couple of your comments, it will affect audits differently depending upon the extent to which they have improved their own procedures beyond our standards. But at the end of the day, it should result in a consistently high level of performance with respect to the oversight of audits where other auditors are involved.
Jay, question?
I highlighted in my statement the questions I've got about this sufficiency determination. I'm wondering if you could just compare and contrast the existing requirements to the new requirements relative to sufficiency, and then also maybe comment on the decisions that were made about essentially treating all other auditors the same, regardless of whether they're in a similar network or outside of the network.
Okay, I'll start, but I think the sufficiency of participation requirement is important, and it's somewhat unique as compared to the others. A lot of what we've talked about here today is about the things the lead auditor is supposed to do with respect to supervising. The sufficiency of participation also gets to the point of how involved is the lead auditor, the firm issuing the report, how involved are they in the actual audit work as opposed to subcontracting out, if you will, other portions of the work. So it's a very important aspect of what we are talking about and unique. Lillian, you want to talk about some of the particulars?
Sure. So, as you had said, we have taken the sufficiency of the determination of sufficiency of participation by the lead auditor and extending it to all audits, because as I had indicated, we're superseding AS 1205, in which that determination resided. So now, since we're moving to full supervision to AS 1201, the supervision standard, we're moving this requirement to all audits, and we're focusing the requirement or the determination on the risks of material misstatement of the portion that is being audited by the lead auditor in comparison with the portion that is being audited by the other auditors. Also, you had said something about an in-network versus out-of-network. It is our understanding that some firms apply different requirements for out-of-network firms versus in-network firms, where this applies today. Our standard doesn't recognize or make any distinction between in-network, out-of-network. The standard would need to be applied across the board, whether you're in-network or out-of-network.
Okay, just one quick follow-on on the sufficiency. You said something about the significance of what was audited by the lead auditor. Do we have some bright lines in here so that somebody applying it could know when they're in or out of bounds?
The release has a few examples in there. The answer is no. There's things that you should take into account. There's some examples in there, and obviously we're seeking feedback on whether it's clear enough, and welcome the feedback.
I think a couple of things I'll add to that, though. Under the current standards that we have, the risk assessment standards that have been in place for a while, when you're approaching these multi-location scoping decisions. It's based on risk. It's based on the risk associated with the locations. That's the basis on which the auditor decides where they're going to go and apply audit procedures. And we have taken that same approach and applied it to the sufficiency determination. So when the auditor is looking to see how they're going to scope the audit and which locations they're going to select for testing, they're going to then use that same test, if you will, and apply it to deciding how much work they need to be doing versus the other auditors. And I think it'll be, I think one thing that is going to generally be true now versus the other, I think it's still going to be important that the lead auditor be doing the work, the audit work, at the location where the key executives are, the key financial reporting decisions are made, the financial statements are prepared. That's still going to be, there's a unique risk that exists at that location that no one else is going to be in a position to cover. So it'll be generally aligned. There's not a bright line test, but it is aligned with the scoping decisions in our existing standards.
Okay. Louis?
Yeah, I'd like to go back for a minute to the sort of dealings we've had with the IAASB on coming up with our standard here, because I have some sense that part of what the problem in the past has been some inconsistencies in standards between the U.S. standards and the international standards. And even though it's clear that auditors in other countries, when they're doing a PCAOB audit, should follow our standards, inevitably if for 90% or 95% of their work they're following other standards, there's a danger of confusion and possibly even of arbitrage between the standards. So as we've now raised our standards to something we think is to what extent are we working with the IAASB to try to get them in their review of ISA 600 to sort of up their game as well? I mean, that's not our charge, clearly, but it seems to me it's very much in our interest to have standards that are as consistent as possible if we really want them to be effective.
Well, where the standards of the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board are applied, our audits that are outside of our scope.
Right.
And regulators, as you all noted in connection with around the world, when they've looked at audits where the international standards are applicable, have indicated that one of their areas of concern, and they have a couple of others, which are on our agenda as well, auditing fair value and estimates, for instance. But one of their areas of concern is these audits that involve other auditors or group audits. And some of the concerns expressed by regulators, and some have been expressed by firms about the application of that standard and what was the necessary involvement of the group engagement team in certain situations, and was the standard clear enough in that regard. Also, there was not that standard did not permit division of responsibility, and if, for instance, there was an equity method investee where the lead auditor really wasn't able to get in and do as much work, there was questions by both the regulators and the lead firm signing it. Well, how do I sign this report if I really can't get into the equity investee and I have to rely on that investee's auditor, but I don't really have good communication with them. So maybe a division of responsibility might be necessary, or other procedures. So we've had a number of discussions. As you know, we participate on the IAASB's consultative advisory group, just as they participate on the PCAOB's standing advisory group. And group audits and use of other auditors has been a subject we've talked about together. We've been moving ahead on this issue for a number of years, really before they put it on their agenda to relook at their ISA 600. So what we're proposing is somewhat different than ISA 600 and more specific in some of the direction with respect to the lead auditor vis-a-vis other auditors. And we'll be interested to see how the IAASB ultimately deals with their existing ISA 600.
And I would just urge you to stay involved with that and express our views to them strongly, because I think it's important that to the extent these standards can be consistent, that they do be consistent. That'll help everybody.
We are, and on a number of the other projects, for instance, I mentioned a project we have on auditing fair values and estimates. They have a similar project where they're looking at their ISA 540, and we're very closely working together on that as well. So we are talking to each other, and to the extent possible, if it achieves high-quality auditing, trying to harmonize procedures.
Just to add to that, we also participate in the standard coordination working group of the EPR,
Right.
and who is currently reviewing, one of the documents they're reviewing is the invitation to comment from the IAASB.
Okay.
Steve?
Well, I have two questions. One, following up on what Lou just mentioned. How do you view this as an improvement over international standards or proposed international standards in terms of your discussions?
Well, I'll start. One of the foundational ways is I think we are more specific about requiring the lead auditor to be sufficiently involved in the actual audit work, performing some of its own audit work, and there are more specific requirements about that. There are also additional, more specific requirements about what the lead auditor needs to do in order to supervise the work of the other auditors.
One of the questions that's come up in the meetings that I've attended at the IAASB CAG has been around audits where actually the lead auditor was signing the report, but most of the work was done by other auditors. And the question there was, what should the lead auditor do in those cases? We have a very specific, not a bright line, but a pretty specific description of how the lead auditor has to think about the sufficiency of their participation in the audit in order to sign the audit opinion. So I think that's an important thing in our audit standard that I know the IAASB is thinking about at least.
Yeah, as I've mentioned to you during the context of our consideration of this, I applaud the clarity and specificity of the requirements of the standard. I think that's extremely important. Finally, I briefly outlined in my statement how I think this proposal helps investors. And you mentioned that as well in your statement. But would you care to elaborate your views on how this proposal, as you see it, directly impacts and affects investors?
Well, when I think about this questions like that, I start with from the standpoint of the thing the investor sees as the report from the lead auditor. And now with the additional disclosures that will be required under transparency, they'll get some indication of other participants. But the question when you look at the auditor, the audit report is then, so what's the lead auditor's basis? Do they have a reasonable basis for even expressing that opinion? And this proposal affects that in two ways. It first of all means that as I said before, the lead auditor is not just subcontracting out the audit. They are actually involved in doing the audit work. And then secondly, that they are involved with the work of the other auditors to make sure that the work is appropriately planned, supervised, and evaluated so that so that the overall audit is conducted in accordance with standards, that there is enough evidence to support the opinion, and that it is properly evaluated.
One of the things I just want to make sure I comment on, I think that the IAASB did a good job with their ISO 600 on group audits, and I think that standard advanced the ball in terms of auditing multinational audits. We took into account those enhancements in ISO 600, but we also took into account their own assessment of some of the challenges in applying that standard, as well as IFER's comments. We took into account some of the changes firms have made above the methodology that might be based on ISO 600, responding to some of the inspection deficiencies we've had in our inspections of referred work where other auditors are involved, and inspections by international regulators. And we've looked at yet other things that we could possibly do to further enhance the standard to get to a consistently high bar. So I don't want to make it sound like the international standard, it was not a good starting place. They made advances when they put that standard out several years ago.
The chief auditor mentioned the fact that is in the proposing release, but I think can't be forgotten. That is that our staff analysis indicates the number of accounting firms involved in an audit is in some cases greater than 20 firms in an audit. And then the release goes on to say that the PCAOB oversight data in audits we select suggests that the other auditors audit on the average between 1/3 and 1/2 of the total assets and total revenues of the company being audited. The chief auditor mentioned this, but it's in the proposing release, and I urge careful reading of it. It leads me to a question, though, for Mr. Vanelli in the center. The economic analysis indicates moral hazard involved in the dynamics of the auditing firm that employs other auditors, and these more than 20. It indicates unanticipated consequences that you all, unintended consequences you all have been thinking about properly. But one comes away, I come away with the sense that if we did nothing, if we adopted no standard, with respect to bright lines and guidance and the rest of it, isn't this an area already in which it is replete with ambiguity, with moral hazard, replete with unintended consequences that we see in our inspections, and that we're trying to move more slowly, move the auditing profession more uniformly and slowly toward a self-consciousness and a self-awareness and an addressing of that moral hazard and the consequences that are already unintended?
Yes.
It's a leading question, Mr. Vanelli, but I'm allowed to do that.
The answer is yes. And move on. No, you're correct in, we think, in identifying moral hazard as the central theme around this particular proposal, in that the lead auditor faces this problem and results from the information asymmetry between the investor and the lead auditor. We think that investors will likely benefit from this proposal. This improvement results from improvements in audit quality due to greater lead auditor accountability for supervising other auditors. Investors might also benefit from greater transparency in the audit due to the proposal increase specificity in regulatory requirements and the resulting increase in consistency across audits. Finally, I would say that improving the quality of audits and financial reporting can result in investors increase public confidence in the financial markets and enhance capital formation for the whole market.
Well, thank you. Unless there are other questions from the board.
I did want to ask one more question, and this gets to be a little bit more granular, which as an auditor, when I supervise and review the work of another auditor, it's all about looking at what's in the work papers, what's been documented. And just wondering how you've dealt with the challenges of if the work papers are 12,000 miles away in another country and there may be restrictions on the transferability of those work papers to the country of the lead auditor, just kind of how we're dealing with that.
Well, I'll start and then I'll pass it over to Keith and team. But certainly the standard requires that the lead auditor have to be able to have access to the other auditors, to be able to communicate and discuss with the other auditors the work, and be able to review whatever documents they want in connection with that work, and to ask the other auditors to provide them with specific documents to assure that the lead auditor knows that that firm has complied with its instructions. So some of the issues about an inspection is the inability to inspect in certain countries. That's not a factor here. The lead auditor, if the lead auditor can't have access to the work that the other auditor did, can't review that work, they would have a scope limitation. So they have to be able to review that work and understand that the work done is responsive to the instructions and to the risks of material misstatement in that environment. Others?
Just to add to that, but the proposal would not preclude any effective methods of remote access and remote review by the lead auditor. The firms have made significant advancements in that area. I mean, there is ability to access remote working papers remotely and indicate the review remotely. So the proposal would definitely not preclude any of that.
And the only other thing I'll add to that is that there's sort of a prophylactic requirement to think about that at the planning stage, so that the auditor doesn't find themselves thinking about at the front end, oh, I'm going to go use that work, and then only to find later on that there's a problem. It requires them to think about that up front before they make the decision that that's the way they're going to go.
Without hearing other questions, all in favor of issuing the proposal, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, it is adopted. Thank you again to the staff and to all who worked on it. We are going to adjourn now. This concludes the business of the meeting. We have a closed meeting, but we need to allow about 20 minutes, I think, for the room to be reconfigured. So we'll reconvene, if that's convenient for board members, at 11:20. go forward with the closed meeting.
Yeah, don't we leave the room the same?
Shouldn't be long. Should not take long.
I've got it 12 o'clock.
Well, we'll be able to make it. They can't do the room in faster than 20 minutes, some tells us. We have a physical limit. Yeah.